Hello everyone, my name is Jay. I'm one of the expert OET teachers at E2 Language. What I'm going to talk to you about today is the role of accents, both in the workplace and also during your test. So this presentation is relevant to your speaking test, but it's also relevant to your listening test as well, because as Rebecca just mentioned, you will hear a variety of different accents in the listening section of the OET as well. So what I want to do is talk to you about how you can understand more easily and how you can be understood more easily as well. So let's think about being understood, okay? So obviously you have your first language if you're a non-native English speaker, and you'll be speaking in English. And when that happens, there's a phenomenon that happens, or something in linguistics called first language interference, which is the influence of your first language on the way that you speak. That can come through a variety of different ways. It might be through pronunciation. It can also be through grammar and vocabulary. And there's a whole lot of social stuff as well. Okay, so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the effect or influence that your first language has when you're speaking English. And also, I want you to sort of think about the other way around, flip it around, because in your workplace and on the test as well, you're going to hear a variety of different Englishes. And I say English is plural here on purpose because there's not just one English around the world. There's who knows how many. Everybody has their own accent, etc. But also there's regional differences with English as well. So you'll be, perhaps you'll experience some issues when trying to understand your colleagues. So think about it from that angle as well. So let's imagine that you're speaking English and someone is listening to you. And let's think about all of those influences from your first language when that's happening. So your accent is comprised of various elements, okay? So one is called intelligibility. It's also comprised of fluency, grammar and vocabulary. And if we look at this from the angle of the exam that you're about to take, or one day will take in OET speaking, you're actually assessed on these elements as well. So the assessors will be listening to your recording of your speaking test, and they'll be evaluating it according to the linguistic criteria on intelligibility, fluency, and grammar and vocabulary. There is also another set of criteria that they evaluated on, which is the clinical communication criteria, which is a bit different. So here we're just looking at the language aspect. If we look more closely at what these mean, you can see that intelligibility consists of various things in itself. This is why language is so complex, right? It's like Russian dolls. There's all sorts of things going on with language. So intelligibility consists of pronunciation. That is how clearly you can articulate all 44 sounds of English. Okay, so in all languages, there are different sounds. These could be called phonemes. So English has 44 of these, and that consists of your pronunciation. We'll look at that in a little bit, actually. I'm going to dive into a specific language in a second, and we'll look at its influence on English. You're also scored on intonation. That is the way that you rise when you're asking a question, or perhaps go down when you're saying something that maybe is solemn, for example. Intelligibility also consists of word stress, and this is particularly interesting because basically you can split all of the languages in the world into two groups. There are those that use word stress. That is that they place a specific emphasis on a specific syllable inside a word. Like, for example, let's look at the word intelligibility. Intelligibility, the emphasis goes on the t sound there. But there's another whole variety of languages that don't have word stress. They're syllable-based languages. And for example, a lot of South Indian languages are syllable-based languages. That means they don't emphasize a specific syllable in a word. Instead, they emphasize all the syllables quite evenly. And this can be a little bit difficult for people who don't speak that language when you're trying to communicate with them or understand them. So you need to be conscious of that. Fluency is another aspect that you're evaluated on. This includes things like the speed or tempo of your speech, smoothness, that is whether or not you're hesitating when you're looking for the words. Do you have all the vocabulary and grammar there? Does it come to you automatically, or are you trying to sort of sift around and find a way to phrase something from your first language into English. And also emphasis. Emphasis can be at the word level as well in a sentence, if you want to place a specific emphasis on a particular word. And I'm just going to totally avoid grammar and vocabulary because that's an unbelievably complex area. So I guess what I want to say here is when you are preparing for your OET and OET speaking, there are a number of things that you need to be conscious of, okay, in order to improve your speaking. And it can be very complex, very complex. Okay, there are two key points when thinking about your first language into English. That is, how different is your first language to English? Now, some languages are actually quite similar to English. For example, German is not too dissimilar to English. However, Vietnamese, in terms of speaking, is incredibly different. They have they have their own way of saying things and a whole different sound system to English. So Vietnamese speakers might have quite a bit of trouble when speaking English, whereas Germans might do it a bit more easily. The second key point is, are you conscious of those differences? Okay? Or are you unconscious of the difference between your first language and English? Obviously, it's going to be much better if you become aware of all those differences so you can begin to work on them long before test day too. One thing I want to point out here is it's not about native like English. By no means do I wish to sort of project that. It's all about clarity. As I said, there are all sorts of varieties of Englishes and they're all valid. However, you must be clear on test day when you're speaking, okay? So let's do a little experiment here. If you're a South Indian speaker, you'll play the role of the speaker here, whether you speak Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, or Malayalam. Okay, so this will be relevant for you if these are your first languages, or this is your first language. Or if not, imagine that it's your first day of work and you're listening to a nurse who's just come from Kerala. Okay, so we're going to look at some of those differences in more detail. So here are the English consonant sounds. These are the sounds that we make where we use part of our mouth, maybe our lips, our teeth, our tongue, some of our anatomy here, like p, b, f, v, the, t, d, etc. Now, if we look at these South Indian languages, these are the problem sounds that you'll have. You'll have a problem with the p sound, or the f, or this is a big one. The v sound is a particularly problematic sound. The th, or the t sound for South Indians often becomes a d sound, a d, where they hit the top of the mouth with the tongue. So these sorts of influences you need to be conscious of and try to sort of remediate or fix before test day, or at least practice. And if you're on the receiving end, if that nurse from Kerala, for example, is saying something to you with a d sound, perhaps there is some influence there from her first language. Okay, so here's a practical example of this. Look at the word vegetable, vegetable. There's certain standards and norms about how people say the word vegetable in English. But often when a South Indian speaker would say vegetable, it might sound a bit like vegetable, vegetable. Okay, there's an influence here from the v to the w sound. There's also an insertion of a vowel that doesn't exist. So that's just one example. Another one would be when this is a chain of supermarkets in South Asia, by the way, called Food World. And when let's say a Kannada speaker says Food World, it might sound a bit like Pudvald, 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 because there's an influence there, or an influence from the f to the p sound, and also again the w to the v sound. Okay. Vowels, it's not too much of a problem here. Okay, so here are the English vowels. We've got e, a, o, or, u, a, and e. Strange making all these little sounds, but that's what a vowel sound is. It's a sound that is unimpeded by our teeth or our tongue or our throat or anything. Now, for South Indian speakers, there's not much of an issue here. Just two sounds could be problematic. So that's not too bad. If you're an Arabic speaker, however, you're going to find a variety of issues with vowel sounds. There are big differences between Arabic and English as one example language. Now, this is where it gets really complicated for South Indian speakers, because we have these things in English called multi-vowel sounds, like a, I, oi, ow, o, ear, air, or, ir, and hour. Now, for South Indian speakers, look at all the red ones here. These are the ones that you may not have in your first language, or when you're saying it in English, there's some sort of interference there. So you need to be conscious of that. Just going to check my WhatsApp here to make sure I'm all on time. All's good. So I'm going to wrap it up here by saying that you need to be mindful when you're speaking, both in the OET speaking test, also in the workplace, but also you need to be mindful when listening to others who will have some sort of interference from their first language when speaking English, unless they've worked really hard to iron out some of those issues, which I highly recommend you do long before test day. Cool, that's me. I'm going to hand it now to Milan from IRS.